Are you ready to deliver keynotes that not only captivate, but convert? In this episode of the Lead Machine Growth Show, we reveal the storytelling secrets, content strategies, and presentation techniques, and maybe a little bit of fun that will help you to get engaged with any audience and drive action. Tune in and learn how to master every moment of your keynote from the first word to the final applause.
Welcome to the Lead Machine Growth Show, where you will discover how to tackle your tech, master your message, and design your dream. Paul Guyan, the mastermind behind the Lead Machine, introduces you to trailblazers who inspire you to implement life-changing solutions and systems you can model to nurture your leads and get your offers seen by your ideal clients who will invest in themselves and you. Be sure you visit our website at www.leadmachinegrowthshow.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, tune in and get ready to transform your vision into reality.
Welcome to the Lead Machine Growth Show. I'm Paul Guyan, your host, lead machine coach, and the founder of the Lead Machine Marketing Group and Mastermind. And I'm dedicating to helping you tackle your tech, master your message, and design your dream life. My friend Brad Szollose is on the show today. Brad, buddy, thanks for coming today.
Sure.
I was looking at our notes, and we're not going to get into your bio today because if you want to go check out episode number 5, we had a really good time. I was just getting started in this game of podcast hosting, and it was really a good conversation. And you can learn all about Brad in that episode, as well as you can go to bradzzollose.com. Is that correct?
Yes, you can go to bradzzollose.com, Google me. You can go to Awakened Nation Podcast as well, .com, awakenednationpodcast.com. And I'm everywhere. You can find me. It's not that hard.
Yeah. And it's awesome. His podcast is really amazing.
Thanks.
He's had some great guests on there. Dog the Bounty Hunter was on there one time.
Yeah.
But you've had lots of really interesting people on there.
I just had Belinda Carlisle from the rock band The Go-Go's. I had her on a couple of weeks ago. I've had Stephen M.R. Covey, whose father wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I've just been surprised at who says yes when I send out the invite. So, and we have a conversation. I'm not one of these people who has a scripted thing. I never know what I'm going to ask sometimes when we're about to go live. So, I guess it's working without a net for some people, but I enjoy it. Love it.
Yeah. Well, that's from performing.
Yeah.
And I know that I know how you got your start, but let's share with our audience how you got your start with public speaking and what were some kind of the unusual ways that got you into that game?
Well, first of all, I stepped on stage at 9 years of age. Okay. That was the very first time I stepped on stage. And it was because my mom played piano and sang all the classics, all the oldies, Judy Garland, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, all this stuff. So I would accompany her on drums. And that gig was so painful, that very first gig, I froze. I couldn't smile even on stage. I was like, I was terrified. And then I wound up doing radio in high school. I was the voice of WLHS at my high school. And then years later, I'm in New York City and I'm doing some voiceover work as well as graphic design work. And I think it was after I took I took a company public back in the day, and then I wound up doing stand-up comedy. And I thought to myself, what can I do with all this accumulated knowledge I have? And I decided to write a book. And someone had told me, hey, you could make a pretty good living as a speaker. You could be a corporate speaker or motivational speaker. And I went, wait a minute. People get paid to speak? I was so naive, Paul. I had literally no idea that it's one of the highest paid professions, by the way. Probably next to high-end consulting. You can make like $10,000 to do 1 hour's worth of work. So I mean, it's I went, you've got to be kidding me. And so I started that process, and you're going to learn some of that process today, but don't be impressed because I bombed the very first time I did a speaking gig up in Albany at the Chamber of Commerce. And I sent that, I hired a speaking coach who was already making money speaking at the corporate level. I sent him my videotape, and he looked at it, and he basically said, "No, wait, Brad, you did stand-up comedy for 8 years, right?" I said, "Yes, I did." He goes, "Did that guy show up at that gig?" Meaning there was no comedy. He said, "You were lecturing people."
Yeah.
And I want everybody today to take some notes. You don't want to be lecturing people. That's number one. It's a number one lesson from Uncle Brad. And I went through the torture and the pain of bombing so you could get this information. Every speaker bombs, by the way. Um, and what happened is at the back of the room at that gig, and this is also another piece of advice. Anything that's missing from your talk, people will ask either in questions or their response will be, "Hey, what about this?" And so people at the back of the room had their arms crossed, and I talk about generational issues, how they impact business, and how to create a friction-free environment from that. So what motivates a baby boomer will never motivate a millennial. And I was trying to point that out. And boomers are in the back of the room basically going, "I don't give a darn. They needed to be paddled. It's my way or the highway." And then they couldn't figure out why people were leaving en masse as a big group. And so here I am standing on stage bombing miserably, going, how do I communicate better with those who have resistance to this message? And so I started to delve deeper into all of this. So that's a long way around how I got into public speaking. And by the way, I wrote about a hot topic. I didn't know it was a hot topic at the time, but how to run a company in the 21st century. I wrote Liquid Leadership, and I really delved into why generation, millennial and X and even Gen Z now, why they act the way they do. And I didn't know that was going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and I think we met in right around the time that you had released that, and I think in 2010.
Yes, back in 2010 into 2011. I released it at the very end of the year, like October and around there. And then I won a couple of awards the following year, wound up in New York City, and then I wound up doing some keynotes and speaking out in Michigan. And that's when you and I met.
Yeah. So was there a speaker or an experience that you had when you were either an audience member that said, "Oh, I want to be like that guy or gal"?
There's a lot of speakers that influenced me, but it was more the influence from stand-up comedy that probably perfected what I was talking about, because people learn when they laugh. They learn deep lessons. So one of the first things I did was when I decided to become a corporate speaker, I took all my comedy, gigs, all the comedy material I had, and transitioned it to a corporate stage. What was the lesson? That's number one. And number two, how did it affect business? Mm-hmm. And number three, were we getting money because of doing this process that I'm talking about, or did we save money? All corporations want to hear is, how did we make money, or how did we save money? Okay. And my stories are hilarious around that, because I talk about my Hungarian father who grew up during the Great Depression and was so cheap, he wouldn't buy me new furniture for my bedroom in 1973, I think it was. He wouldn't buy me new furniture. He brought out the furniture he built in wood shop during World War II. Okay, so now if some of you are laughing at that, all I can say is this: that is a story you can take up on stage, and you can glom any lesson you want from that story, as long as you emphasize what you want to talk about. Like my dad being so cheap and missing, like there's a cycle of something coming and you're resisting it, Dad. You can talk about stuff like that. So this
Yeah.
is what influenced me. Comedy influenced me more than anything. Of course I admire all the great speakers, Tony Robbins, Brian Tracy, Bob Proctor. I mean, yeah, they roll off the tongue, and each one has something very powerful in the way they deliver, and they're master storytellers. But I want everybody you can start there, but you have to develop your own style. And your own style begins with, how do you tell stories when you're out having drinks with a couple of friends? You always have that one story. And I recommend this to everybody. You always have that one story that you love to tell to your friends, and you hit the punchline, you make it funnier, you make it wittier, simply because you're with your friends. And when you hit that punchline, you take a sip of your drink, and you kind of have this smug attitude, like, nailed it. That's your story. You got to write that down. Record that the next time you go out with friends. Put a recording device in the center of the room and just start talking. And then when you tell your stories, it'll pick it up, and you'll forget the recorder is going, and you'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember this time I did this. This is the key to master storytelling. We all have the ability, and we all do it when we're out with friends and we're trying to impress each other. We're trying to one up each other, and we tell that great story. That may be your signature story. And I just gave you a key to your opening story, which is incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what I was going to go to. But before we do that, though, we mentioned Keynote. So
Yeah.
what's the difference between a keynote and I'm one of 6 speakers that are speaking at a summit?
Well,
What's the difference?
you're either a guest speaker, which means you've been called in to do a short segment, maybe 20 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Maybe you will do the hour to hour and a half slot, but you're still a guest speaker. And that's usually in the middle of the summit that you're attending. Usually the keynote speaker is somebody who ends the day each day, or they end the entire 4-day summit on that hour and a half keynote at the beginning. Now, there's 2 types of keynotes. There's the opening keynote, which I love because I set the tone for the entire,
Yeah.
summit for 2-3 days. And I've done that at insurance summits. And the fun part about that is, for the rest of the summit, every time they run into me, they yell out a catchphrase that I made them say during the summit. And almost always the other millennials and Gen Xers around them are going, yeah, Brad's right, man. And they'll quote my dad. This is the best part. So opening keynote is a lot of fun. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, but guess what? You set the tone for the whole thing. And then there's the closing keynote, which is usually on the last day. And that person, whoever does that, they do 90 minutes. You're not going to do 90 minutes right out of the gate. But with today's lessons I'm going to throw at you, and you write them down, you'll be able to do that quicker than most people.
Excellent description. That's what I thought it was. I wanted to make sure that our audience understood the difference. Now, first of all, we know that we mentioned stories 3 or 4 times already, so we're going to get into that.
Right.
Is the structure of a keynote and a guest speaker pretty much the same, though?
It can be, but a lot of times these companies, they hire a guest speaker to do a workshop, and that's called a breakout room. And that we have the main stage, and then breakout rooms are where, like, the sales professionals go off to the side and learn that one piece of, elusive competitive edge that'll help them sell better, let's say.
Yeah.
The closing keynote is usually motivational, and it's usually the CEO asked this person to do this keynote to get a message across to everybody. Like a friend of mine, I hate to say it, but one year he complained he didn't get a raise, but all 6 of the executives took a very big raise and bonus because they closed down a couple of stores, and then they were proud of themselves that they made a 94% profit that year. Well, it's because you closed 2 of your stores. Well, the keynote speaker that they hired basically had the message of be grateful and shut up. And so I hate to say it, but sometimes the keynote closer isn't always the best message, but usually whoever plans the session is usually the person is giving them that rah feeling. It gives them that motivation and the tactics and the tools to get up and walk out the door and go, I love that conference. I learned so much and I want to do what he just said. Um, we've all gone to a comedy club and we sit there and there's 15 to 20 comedians. And I'm going to tell you what happens when you have that many. You never remember the other comedians' names. And the only thing you do remember is the first comedian, the MC usually, and maybe a couple of bits in and there, the famous comedian that got up to test a few things, and then the closing comedian. You don't remember the other 10 or 15. You just don't. You can't. Your mind can't take that much information in. And we'll talk about that later. But you want to be memorable on stage. And one of the things you had asked before, who had inspired me? And I'll tell you, it is comedy that always inspires me. And I want people to go look at this. Bert Kreischer, the comedian, he did a bit called The Machine. And it's basically a 15-minute story on stage that he told during his comedy act. And this story is him barely passing Russian. He was taking Russian in college as a language. And his teacher, his professor said, hey, we're doing a trip to Russia. Well, for some odd reason, Bert decided, hey, I'm going to go party and I'm going to go meet these Russian mobsters because he talks about how everything in Russia is run by the mob. And he walks in and his Russian is so bad. He had this whole thing planned out that he was going to say. And instead he said, I'm the machine. In Russian, when they introduced him, he goes, I'm the machine. And then people started laughing. And the legend started to build. Wherever he went, they go, are you the machine? You are the machine. I am so honored to meet you. And the other train with the other mobsters, they were paid off. You got to meet this guy. He is machine. Well, I'm going to tell you what happened to this. This is a master class in storytelling. He took a basic premise that actually happened to him, and he embellished it. There, I got the right word. Embellished it to the point where, I mean, it's all true, but you almost go, oh my God, this guy did something crazy. Well, guess what happened with that story? It took on a life of its own. Millions of people looked at it on YouTube, and eventually they turned it into a movie starring Mark Hamill and Bert Kreischer doing an adventure where he had to prove he's the machine once again, and it was hilarious. So your story can take on a life of its own. Ryan Estes is another one I recommend. Ryan, he was depressed because his father was dying. And he had, at Christmas time, he had to fly out to Ohio to see his family. So he's at the Minneapolis airport. And this woman behind the counter says, Ryan, what can I get you? And she's so up, and her customer service was exemplary. And Ryan's like standing there like, what just happened? He had a great moment. He felt happy. He's walking away with his gingerbread latte. And he takes a sip and he goes, wait a minute. He felt all this joy from this person, and he walked back and he said, Lily, what is the secret to you doing this? And he started telling this story, and this story had legs, and it started to be picked up by corporations. And then several corporations wanted to film it, the extraordinary customer service experience. And before you knew it, Ryan actually had Lily fly out to the company retreat where he was giving the keynote speech so everybody could meet her. And today, Lily at that airport, people come up to her and want to get a picture with her. This is a great customer service story that really you might not have thought of it as a customer service story, but what drives that one employee? So all your stories that you're going to start to tell should start to shift into driving people to listening to your business ideas, to how this can make you more money. I guarantee you that Starbucks or that coffee shop there, I don't know if it's a Starbucks, I believe it is, where she works, that particular coffee shop probably does an extra $1 million a year because of her. And those are the stories you have to get out to people. Where did you get that exemplary customer service experience? And that'll help your keynotes. When you're driving a purpose behind the keynote, that is going to get people to hire you from the stage.
Yeah, and I think it takes a knack to correlate your everyday experiences with the message that you've got. So it does take some practice, but I use that in my newsletters all the time, where I take a picture or a slice of my life that that might have happened, and I'll embellish it usually, and and get it to correlate with, you know, a lesson in leadership. This came up when this person you know, said these words, and that's why it resonated with me, and you should be listening to this because of that. So it does take a little bit of finesse to do that, doesn't it?
It does, but here's the wonderful part about it. If you are serious about becoming a keynote speaker, I suggest you start carrying around one of those little tiny spiral notebooks. And I was one of these people, Paul, and you know me, I'm funny in person. Okay. So I'm joking around. I'm like,
No kidding.
When I did the Pinocchio thing, you know, when I look around this room, you know, I do those kind of things. And I'm driven by bringing joy into people's hearts. That's really why I you know, make people laugh. I want to, you know, help them, you know, kind of open their heart, and we can all relax a little bit. But what happens is I'm a jokey person, and then all of a sudden it's like I forget what I did to make that person laugh 10 minutes later. It just flows for me.
Yeah.
So I had to develop the discipline when I decided to become a professional stand-up comedian. I had to take that discipline that I had as a corporate executive and transform it over to what I was doing. So I'd crack a joke at the cash register and the girl would laugh, and I'd go to leave, and I started to just take a note. I would give a one-word sentence to what happened, or I'd write it out, a little bit of detail, because some things are complex. And then I would put the notebook away, but I always started carrying one. And then maybe a month later, I'd look through my notes and I go, hey, that was pretty funny. And I could remember it and call it back. Then I would say to myself, now, how can I do that on a stage? And I would take that story, or I would take that moment, and I would write it out and then practice it. And then I'd do it in front of an audience and I'd test it. The way you can test if you don't do it in front of an audience is test it amongst friends. Don't let them know you're telling a story. Just say, hey, I had this amazing experience. And you tell it, and then you hit your punchlines, and you're going to embellish, because everybody who wants to be a master storyteller, when we're out with our friends, we do crack jokes, and we make it a little funnier, and we put a little spice on it. And if you're recording it at a dinner table, like I suggested at the beginning, guess what's going to happen? That story is going to come to life, and it's going to get beautiful. It's going to go from this slab of marble to a beautiful sculpture. And those stories are the key to not only converting people to your way of thinking and wanting to lean forward and hand their credit card to you, but they're going to see that you have a very unique way of solving problems. And that's what they pay for. They don't pay for a one-headed goat, as my comedy coach used to say. No one pays to see a one-headed goat. They pay to see a two-headed goat.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to be.
Two-headed goat.
So what else?
Yeah, taking notes is a great idea. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I learned, let's go back to me bombing on stage in those first couple of gigs. I hired some people who specialized in performance, not the speaking. I have the speaking down. I've been doing that since I was a kid. It was the ability to create and craft something on stage that would make people look and go, whoa, this is different. This is different, what's about to happen. So I started to realize that boomers were fighting and resisting what millennials were bringing to the table. And I'm talking corporate, you know, because I'm thinking I have to be polished, I have to wear a suit, and I have to hit all the notes, you know, perfection.
Yeah.
And then I realized, what if I went back? Because most of these people in the audience, they are parents, or they want to be parents. Or if they're childless and they're young, especially, they're sitting there going, my parents love me and we're best friends, but I don't understand my parents, you know, that kind of thing. And I said, I gotta bridge the divide. And then somebody said, well, what did you play with as a kid? And I went, well, we had this. And I started to bring the toys on stage. And the first thing I pulled out was a GAF Viewmaster. And I
Mhm.
started to explain, this is what boomers used to use. This was our most interactive device, and this is technology to a boomer. Okay. And then I started to realize, oh, anybody born, and I wrote this in my book, anybody born after 1984 got one of these, which is this that I'm holding up as a Nintendo 64 game controller for those of you who are listening at home. And then I hold the two devices side by side and I just look at the audience and I go, do you think we might think differently from one generation to the next? Because this stuff impacts your brain. And that's when people stopped arguing with me. I
Yeah.
had a woman CEO come up to me after a keynote on Long Island. She was crying and she looked right at me and she goes, Brad, I thought I had messed up as a grandmother and now you made me understand. I said, well, what did I do? She goes, I now understand why my 4-year-old granddaughter doesn't want to play with a Barbie doll. She wants an iPhone. And she couldn't figure it out. And I was able to help them do this. Now that's a parental thing because everybody in the audience started to lean forward and go, whoa, people actually hired me to teach them how to talk to their kids.
Yeah.
And I thought they were going to hire me for business.
Yeah.
And just remember, folks, you're going to have happy accidents along the way. And I just told you one of mine. Um, but where they hired me for business was this. You cannot sell to a millennial who's in charge of buying your product if you don't have a millennial with you. When you go to that sales call, I had to tell every single boomer, when you show up in a three-piece suit and a tie and you walk in that office, they immediately dismiss you in their mind because you look like their dad or their grandfather.
Right.
But when you kind of have an open collar, nice sport jacket, you're wearing something cool, maybe you have some sunglasses, but you got a millennial right next to you, that smoothed out that transition. And so people don't realize, this is a generation that was taught how to, invest their own money using E-Trade. They don't like that a bank has, marble floors and wooden walls. They don't like that. That they think you're wasting their money. And they believe they know how to trade and buy and sell stocks better than you. And now we have a generation raised on Bitcoin. So what are you going to do in your keynote to let people know what are the new trends, what are the new things that are coming up, what are fads, what are now new realities? That turns you into that two-headed goat I talked about. Don't just deliver boring, deliver something extraordinary.
Awesome. So what process do you use in structuring your keynote? Is there a framework you follow, like starting with a problem and leading to a resolution and with stories along the way? Is that kind
Here's
of
what
it?
I do. Here's what I do, Paul. This
All
is my
right.
secret sauce. Everybody get out a pen and paper if you haven't done so already, or take notes on your computer. Here we go with the magic sauce.
All right. Let's
I
dive
build a
in.
keynote speech 10 minutes at a time. Okay. I want you to write almost an outline form, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you say, what do you want to say in your opening story? Second, what do you want to say in the second one? Third, fourth, and fifth. Now, I'm going to warn you, people only remember 3 points in any keynote, but you want to have 7 if you want to build up to an hour and a half. By the way, you're not going to do an hour and a half right out of the gate. So start with 5 to 10 minutes at a time. So the first, quadrant, you write down what you want to say, but what's the story behind that thing you want to say? Just write out a little paragraph about what the story is. Then at the end of that story, repeat the question you had at the beginning. And I'll give you a good example. When I started my company down in New York City back in the 90s, I realized, we were selling to people who didn't know what the internet was. But all of a sudden, within a year, everybody was calling us up. Those same people who thought we were lost our minds selling digital stuff, they called us up and they go, our boss just demanded that we build a website. We need you guys to come back. Now they knew what the internet was.
Mhm.
So how do you sell in that? And we spent months having people reject us with a PowerPoint presentation or an interactive presentation on a laptop. Laptops were newfangled things back then. And so the only way we could teach them about the internet was create a canned demonstration of it. And I started to realize that the title for that story would be this: Are you in the middle of a revolution and you don't know it? Because nobody wants to be in the middle of something great that's happening, huge change, and they're not part of it. Nobody wants that. So I would start that talk like this: Are you in the middle of a revolution and you don't know it? And I'd stop, I'd pause that uncomfortable moment of 10 seconds and just look around the room. And maybe I repeat it, depends on the room. Are you in the middle of a revolution and you don't know it? And then I go, back in the early 90s, my business partner runs into the office and goes, Brad, we have to become an internet company. And I'm like, what the heck is the internet? Because back then, because I'm painting the picture, I'm taking them into the past. And I go, back then, very few people knew what the internet was. Some of you are laughing with me, some of you are laughing at me. And I look around the room and I go, I know who you are. I make a joke out of it. And then I went into how we had to sell this idea to these executives and the people who are buying. We had our original portfolio, but then at the end, we had this digital one on a laptop, interactive. We did all this. And I started to notice no one would buy our product. They would glaze over at that part of the presentation. But then a miracle happened. After about 3 months, we went into an older executive's office at Chase, and he's looking at our presentation. And he goes, "Gentlemen, could you create a CD-ROM hybrid that would launch a proprietary browser that would allow our investors to log in and see our annual report? Could you guys do that?" And some of you right now are listening, go, yeah, I get that. But back in the mid 90s, late 90s, no one knew what that was unless you were working in the internet space, interactive. And all of a sudden, the guy would tell us, this is what I need. And we literally sat there like the dog had just spoken, in silence for a minute when he said that. And we sat out and we go, yeah, we can do that. And what happened is this became a pattern. If it was an executive, whether male or female, they all seemed to know what the internet was, but everybody underneath them in the middle of the organization didn't know what was going on. And entry-level employees at the bottom coming up knew how to build their own websites, answer email. They knew what a T1 line was, and they also knew how to archive everything. And so I very dramatically go, at the very top, we had executives who knew what they were doing. And at the very bottom, entry-level employees knew all about the internet. But in the middle was this group that was just working and had no idea what was going on. I said, that middle group was in the middle of a revolution and they didn't know it. And a year later, and we asked these executives, how do you know so much about the internet? And they all had the same answer.
Grandkids.
They're grandkids. You got it.
Yeah.
And so when I tell that story to salespeople, I turn it around and I go, you got to ask better questions. You got to get on the same side of the table to solve their problems. And when you ask those questions, make sure you know what the resistance is and what is making them lean forward. So, and then after I tell all that, I get them to ask different questions and get them maybe to think differently. I turn around again and I said, are you in the middle of a revolution right now, this second, and you don't know it? Boom. That's how you craft your 10 minutes right there. You have a beginning, middle, end, what lesson you learn, and then you put it back on the audience. You say, what can you do differently today to get better tomorrow? And those are the kind of things you do that 10 minutes at a time, each talk. And by the way, don't discredit some of the things you've done. I've sat down with people who have things missing from their resume, and you find out they did something extraordinary, and you're like, what? You got to put that in your resume. we, especially boomers, we have a tendency to discredit, some award we got or this salesperson we had a chance to work with or, different things like that. You have to really look at those things as teaching moments and lessons that you can pass on to other people.
I love it. And so you just rinse and repeat. You have these different sections of your 10-minute segments
Yes.
that reinforce the message that you want to convey.
Right.
Right. And then you obviously those segments need to tie into that big idea and sort of unpack it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you're going to discover as maybe you want to look at your entire career. Maybe you were a sales professional through the whole process. Maybe you were a safety expert. Maybe you worked in security your whole life and secrets that corporations need. And you can craft the title of your speech to fit after you start building this machine, as they say. As you build this machine, you're going to start to realize, oh, I'm talking about this. And I want to put this out here. People don't buy logic. Okay. When they see a title of a talk, you want that title to make them lean in. So our good friend Dave Sheffield is a wordsmith when it comes to renaming things.
Yeah.
And so I suggest you hire somebody to take that talk and turn it into something powerful, something that makes those who are buying your talks sit forward and go, wow. Like I have a client right now, and she basically built a company into $1 billion brand. And I said, you're the $1 billion brand maker. And that's her title. She owns it because she has done it. You're the $1 billion brand maker. And so we have one of her speeches basically, how to build $1 billion brand from scratch. And she's getting hired for that right now in Turkey. Her first big corporate speech, she's flying to Turkey, okay, to do the speech. So how you name your speeches is going to get you hired. And it's got to be dynamic and it's got to deliver. I always like to have tools, tactics, and strategies in what I'm talking about. This is what I want you to do. And I have them write it down. How do you talk to a prospective client? How do you pitch a big idea? How do you transition people from the way they used to think to the way they are now? Or how to integrate your sales team when they're cross-generational? Boom. Things like that. This is what companies want, need, and demand. They're just waiting for you to show up.
Now, sometimes there's a lot of information to share, which we talked about at the top of this thing. And I'm an IT, I'm a solutions guy and implementalist, and sometimes you can get deep down into it, but that's really relevant stuff that people need to know to get their email delivered, or to respond to leads and to close and convert and follow up, those kinds of things. There's some stuff deep down that you need to be aware of to take care of so that you can be heard and you can reach people. So how do you make that information digestible and memorable?
The first thing everyone has to do when you're sharing complex information is there are 4 learning styles that you have to really take care of. So if you look up DISC training, DISC,
Yeah,
you'll see the 4 behavioral communication patterns of how a lot of people interact. So if you have a high D, a driven person, they're usually in sales. And those people, they don't care about the niceties or the story. They want the meat. Give me the meat. I need it now. But here's the problem with high driven people. They're almost always in sales, but they're not detail oriented. That's the funny part. That's why they all have secretaries who cover their butts, basically.
Yeah.
The second person is someone like me. We're interpersonal people. Interactive. We love to start meetings with, "Hey, Paul, how's your wife doing?" We're not getting to the business. Whereas driven people, they're like, "Did you sign the contract? Why haven't you signed the contract yet, Paul? What is wrong with you?" That's how they are. You can see this in movies like Glengarry, Glenn Ross. You see the personality types. And so almost always in corporate settings, especially if you're a keynote speaker or you're dealing with executives, those are the only two personalities you deal with, the D and an I. But if you're speaking to employees and frontline salespeople, you have to address the S and the C's in the room. And these are steadfast individuals. Usually, those are engineer types, left brain. They get down, they do their work. They probably do 80% of the work in the company, even though they might be 20% of the people. And then you have the C's. Those are contemplative people. You have to inundate them with information. So you can solve all this problem right now in one sentence, and I'll tell you how to do it. Oh, by the way, S's, the only way you're going to get a steadfast person to do anything is you have to put fear in them that if they don't do this, they're going to lose their careers. So when you start your speech, you go, you have your opening story, and then you turn around and go, I'm going to take you on a journey right now, and we're going to learn this, this, and this. And you tell them what they're going to learn. Now, some of you really love details, and you want to see all the data that I'm going to put up on the screen. I can only put so much data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my PowerPoint presentation and the data available for you at this email address, and you can put the email up behind them, and you'll repeat that later in the presentation. And he goes, and for those of you who are busy, I'm not going to waste your time, but I want you to sit back and relax for 1 hour, because what you're about to learn will not only transform your career, it'll up your ability to make money. And we're going to have a good time doing this. You're going to get all the details that you need from this to prove what I'm talking about, and we're going to crush it by Monday morning. Am I right? Am I right, Glenn? Andrew? Going to crush it by Monday morning with what I'm about to show you. Let's dig in. I've just solved the problem of DISC, all four personalities, by promising them everything they want and need, okay, on my delivery. And in 1 or 2 sentences, you solve the problem of people who want to get up and leave, people who don't like you, all these kind of things. I have no time for this stupid story, that kind of stuff. So you drive them forward, just like a good cattle rancher drives their cattle forward. You're going to do that with your audience because you're in control. You're the expert. Never sit up there and deny that you're not the expert. Stop being humble. I think it was Aristotle who said, arrogance, false humility is just as bad as arrogance. So stand in your power, stand in what you're good at, and really deliver the goods, because they're paying you to bring them something they've never seen before. They want that elusive competitive edge that's going to help them succeed a little more this year. And you're here to deliver it.
I love that.
Thanks.
Very good.
And Paul, you're a good example, by the way. When you started doing that mind mapping stuff and you started showing us different ways to use technology, you're brilliant, man. You're brilliant at that stuff. And that's your wheelhouse, baby. I love that.
Well, thank you. Visuals. I know you're a visual guy. You're a fabulous designer. You've done
Thanks.
brochures for us. You've done posters and flyers and all kinds of stuff for our events and things like that. And your books.
Thanks.
So how important are visuals and in making that first impression and delivering and backing up what you're presenting?
I'll give you a good example. Both our mutual friends, Tony Rubleski and Dave Sheffield, came to me and they said, what should we do differently in our PowerPoint presentations and our handouts? And I said, stop making it look like you did it in Word. Yeah. I said, this is not professional design that you're presenting. When you put your PowerPoint up and there's a giant white screen and you have these little letters up there, I said, it's horrible. I said, get a professional designer or learn how to do it. And with Dave, this was the thing I did. And some of you may not see this as a big deal, but the reality is in corporations, especially the higher up you go, design has to be very crisp, simplistic, and almost, as they call it, haute couture, high-end design, which is simple design. And, you may not know this, but real graphic designers use the Swiss grid method for laying things out so that when you go from one slide to the next, the type doesn't move over here all of a sudden. It's still in the same spot when you have a title or something. The bottom right or the bottom left-hand corner should be your logo. Like Dave has the chef in a red box. I put that in the bottom corner. And all his graphics, he had shrunk them down. So there's like this white border around everything. I pulled everything back. So went to the edges of the screen. If you put type on the screen and you're up there talking for 10, 15 minutes, the audience not listening to you, they're reading the type. Okay. So
Yeah.
you want to put a picture up there instead. I did this when I had to give a talk for high school students that were doing a business plan competition. And this was in New York City, and it was at Reuters' main headquarters in a high rise in Times Square. I decided I would have 5 words on the screen. That's it, one at a time. Okay. And one of the words, and you might see this graphic when you do a Google search of me, it just says ambition in the background, and I'm on stage and I'm talking. And the teachers ran up to me afterwards. They go, "How did you get them to sit for an hour?" And what they didn't realize is they didn't listen to my opening statement. I told the story of my dad and how rough he was. And when I'm dealing with younger audiences, I tell them why their parents love them, but don't understand them. I show them the difference in the way they do it. And I said something at the very beginning, if you didn't catch it. I said, how many of you want to be rappers, famous rappers? How many of you want to have a business and be rich? How many of you want to live in a mansion with a hot tub and drive around in the best cars and live the lifestyle that you want? And they all raised their hand. And I said, if you sit and listen to me for 1 hour, I will show you the secrets that all your favorite celebrities, your rap stars, everybody uses to become rich and famous. Will you do that for me? And they all went like this, and they're sitting on the edge of their seats. It's how you phrase your opening segment that will get them to sit down and listen to you for the rest of the hour that you're going to be talking. Of course, deliver, make it interesting, make it interactive. Ask somebody in the audience. So, when cell phones started to be a big deal in the back of the audience, and you get 3 or 4 millennials laughing while a keynote speaker's on stage, and they couldn't figure out why people are laughing in the middle of the serious note, and it's because they were texting each other. So guess how I handled that? I would go, how many of you are on your phone right now? And they would raise their hands. I go, I want you to look this up. Okay, look this up for me. And I would tell them what to look up. And then I'd go into my talk and I'd come back and I go, what did you find out? And then they would stand up and say something in the middle of 350 people. I would make them do this because I would tell the meeting planner to put a microphone in the middle on a stand in the middle aisle. So they'd walk up and they go, I found out that this is, you were right, Brad, blah, blah, blah. And I go, okay, now I got a new assignment for the rest of you. And I would give them another assignment. And then I go into my talk, and I kept them busy through my whole talk. I got millennials to do my work for me. I didn't even have to show what was on the screen. I would show something. I go, okay, here's the percentage of millennials that are doing this, this, and this. And by the way, you have to memorize your stats so you aren't turning around reading your content. You have to just say it. Here's what we discovered. Boom. And then you hit the slide. 60% of millennials do this, blah, blah, blah. So how do you get complex information out there? I just gave you a secret. Okay. Make them look it up. Make them tell you what they discovered. And then I go, I want you to look up this study and I want you to tell me what it says. Do it. Jesse, tell me what they said. And, they want to be participants. So you make them participants. By the way, I want to throw this out. 8% of every audience will hate you. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how great you are. You could be up there sweating, building out, your best rendition of a Doors song. They don't care. They just don't like you. Maybe because you have blonde hair or you have black hair or whatever. They don't like, or you're a Christian or maybe you're Muslim. They're just not going to like you. It doesn't matter what you do. So get over that. Don't try to please everybody, but try to please that 90%. With great content. So getting back to detailed information, you want to get to the meat of what the information's about. and you want to show that, and then turn around and have a little story there. Don't get into the pedantic thing that I did, which is you're reciting everything that's on the screen. You pick out the one piece of meat that's going to make them go, whoa. The statistic that has the aha moment, or the piece of data that drives your entire story. Bring that to the forefront. And by the way, what you find interesting, they may not. And what you find boring, they may sit forward on the edge of their seat and go, I didn't know that. Don't ever remove something because you think, well, they've probably already heard this. I, to this day, still get people come up to me and ask me about generational issues. They want me to speak in Ireland. I can't go right now because my time schedule, but this is what happens. I still get, people calling for keynotes about millennials and Gen Z. How are we going to solve these problems? And also you want to give a break between all too much data. So you want to have a little entertaining segment where maybe you tell a funny story. I had to give a speech in front of oil people and energy producers. These are driven, hardcore men and women who've worked out in, the rigs, and now they've worked their way up to the executive level. They know what hard work is. So I would just tell stories of how my dad forced me to move bricks at 10 years of age, and they can relate to those stories. They're like, yeah, your dad's a good guy. I had an executive laughing so hard in the first row, he was crying. This was up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He's in this big ballroom at this fancy hotel, and he's laughing so hard he's crying. I walked up to him with a microphone. I go, Dave, what? Why are you crying, buddy? And I put the mic in front of his mouth, and he goes, I love your dad. That's all he said. This big, tough, gnarled, 66-year-old executive. He's going, your dad, he was the best. Oh, he's crying. He's laughing. We're having a good time. So whatever your personality is, make it a little bigger on stage is all I can say. I got into the habit in comedy to hit the stage, clapping and go, yeah, here we are, here we go. And I'd start that. So when I hit the stage with a keynote, you want to raise your energy just a little bit above what your audience is doing. If I want to get esoteric right now. So if your audience is sitting there like, I just had a great sandwich. It's after lunch. I'm going to sit here and listen to this guy and snore a little. I don't know if you remember, Tony used to love putting me on right after lunch because I kept them awake. I brought him back from the dead. They'd be sitting there going, that turkey sandwich is delicious, but I could take a nap right now. And so I'd be like, how many of you have kids? Let's go, and I'm not wacky and over the top. I'm just like, what happened to your kid? Blah, blah, blah. And then everything shifted, by the way, talking about happy accidents. Everything shifted when I stopped being pure corporate and started to talk about parenting and how that's affecting the people you're hiring today. The people you're hiring today weren't raised like us. They were all raised to be CEOs in their little reality. They go to Patagonia when they're 23. A boomer never thought of taking a major vacation like that till we were in our 40s. I said, they don't think of it like that. I was doing a workshop once and I asked, people in the room, I go, when you had your midlife crisis, what did you do, Brett? And this guy, he's in his 60s. He goes, I bought a Porsche, and got a divorce. That was his midlife crisis. I turned around and there was I think a 40-year-old in the room. He's kind of an older millennial. And I go, so what did you do when you had your midlife crisis? He goes, I bought a skateboard. Okay. So you laugh a little bit, but it's like, wait a minute, we are really different. And if you can show a corporation how different those worlds are, but how to get a sale out of it, or how to save money, or get the team working together, even though they're cross-generational, they will hire you and pay you big money for that. Your first speeches, by the way, I want to just let you know, you're not going to get 10 grand a speech. Because if you're going to demand 10 grand a speech, every single time you hit that stage, people are going to sit there and be wowed. So you have to build your chops. You have to get better. You have to practice. You have to do things that maybe a lot of people don't know how to do. They don't know how to practice. They don't know how to find audiences. And those first speeches, you might only get $1,500. Plus, maybe they'll buy your book or whatever. But I remember when I started hitting 7,500, you know, and you got to take your ego out of it, because as famous as I might have been on Wall Street or in business or, in comedy and all that, I was starting at the ground
Mhm.
zero when it came to keynote speaking. So I had to really build that up. And it took about 2 years before I could start to command 10 grand. And that became about because I had articles in Forbes. I had done a TED talk. I'd been interviewed on this show or that show, and that builds. So get out there and get started, my friends.
So we're getting down to the end here. What are some things that a speaker can do to leave a lasting impression in the final moments on stage? And this could be a
This,
virtual stage too, of course.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Some keynote speakers get them up to do an exercise, to stand up and start doing uh, a sort of like maybe a dance, or they can try something, or they can sing the company motto or whatever. That to me, you can do that. You can do that. And it does leave a great impression, and everybody's like, oh my God, there is such a great keynote speaker. But a lot of times you really want to end with a really great, uplifting story that blows people's minds. So like one of my stories I used to tell was my ex-wife, her family went through the earthquake down in Haiti, and every single miracle lined up, to save his life. Like her brother never left the bank until 5 o'clock or 10 after 5. And for some reason, he just stood up at his desk at 10 till 5 and walked out the front door, which made no sense because he usually walks out the back door to go to his car. Well, he gets to the middle of the street, and the rumbling starts, and he falls down. He literally needed a cane to walk, so he fell, and the ground just split around him basically. And he looked back at the bank. If he had gone out the way he usually goes out, the entire parking garage had collapsed on his Mercedes Benz. He would have been killed. So
Wow.
one miracle after another, and then he had to walk home, and he can barely walk. Took him all night. He got home at sunrise, and he passed houses that had been sunk into the ground, and only the rooftop was sticking out. And when he finally got home, everybody in French was like, Papa, on vit, Papa, on vit. Papa's alive. And that brings a tear, and it makes people stand up and have this joy, even though it was a tragic moment. Now, I don't tell that one as much anymore, but I do tell some that are more uplifting about, my nephew doing certain things or overcoming this or that. So you always want to end on a high note. And you'll start to realize as you make notes of all the stories of your life, give it one line, over and over again. I have like 4 or 5 great stories I always tell about my dad. One is my birthday, where he walks in the front door. That's actually my opener. My dad walks in and he says, hey, today you're 18, and according to some kind of law, you seem to be a man now. He goes, so you have two choices in this house. You can go to college, and I'll try and help you do that, or you can pack up and move out with your friends. And I go, what's the third option, Dad, or whatever? And then he would say something like, you need to get the hell out of here by the time you're 21, that kind of thing. And then I would pause dramatically because everybody would be looking at me like, this is different. Nobody's opened a keynote like this. And I look around the room, and I have glasses on when I do it, and I pull them off slowly, and I look at them. And I go, oh, do me a favor. Don't tell your mother we had this conversation. And then they start laughing. And then they're like, I said, how many of you had a tough parent? Was your mom tough? They raise their hand, and we get this conversation going. And I go, how many your parents were your best friend? And all the young people go like this. I go, look around the room, boomers. You created this, So we start with a really fun moment, and everybody can relate to it. So you want to have that opening story should set the tone, and your closing story should help them stand up and walk out the room and go, I want to do that on Monday morning. As soon as we get back to the office, I'm going to start doing that. You know, one of the things I always pointed out to people is um, one of my closing stories. I talked about how this guy had trouble with a couple of his younger workers, and I just said, take them out to dinner, take the weirdos out to dinner, especially, and ask them what they're passionate about. And he found out this kid loved to write. He put him in charge of, he put him on the promotional team to pitch new business. And he thrived so much. My friend's company went from, building and getting under $1 million worth of web design here and there to now being able to land $4 million projects at a time, all because he took this one young man out to lunch and picked his brain and said, "You're going to run that division." And so
Wow.
you want, and I got it down to what, a minute and a half to tell you that. I can do that in 5 minutes in a very dramatic way where I build it. So all your stories, as you start to get better and better, you can either, widen it, make it 10 to 15 minutes long, or you can bring it down to 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah.
You'll get that good at being able to do that. But your closing story should help them go walk out that door and go, wow, that was amazing. So watch my TED Talk, by the way. I structure that in 3 ways. The opening speech, what set me up to be this way. Then in the middle, I talk about what created this problem, this transition, this new way of thinking. And then the final part, I talk about how gaming, because my whole talk's about gaming influencing people's realities and their brains. At the end, I talk about problems that can be solved in the future from this, particular thing that I was talking about. And people leave with hope. They leave with joy. They leave with tactics that they can use and carry into the world. And that's really why you want to do it. You want to bring hope to people. You want to bring joy. You want to be motivational, even though you're bringing all these statistics and pie charts. You want to have these great stories that humanize the learning process.
Right. And talking about having hope, we also a lot of us, our listeners, may not want to be keynotes, but they want they're promoting their business, or they're
Yeah.
promoting their thing. So we want to motivate our audiences to take action, whether it's to buy our book or to download our thing, which, by the way, our thing that we download should have all that data in it.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how do we motivate them and convert them? Because we did promise that at the top of the episode.
First of all, most of your stories, if you're doing selling from the stage, you want to show how your secret sauce converted them to work with you and how much money they made. And you don't have to give, numbers. You can say, we increased their business by 300%. And that'll make people lean forward. And you can tell them, I'm going to have an irresistible offer here at the end. I usually charge $5,000 for this, but we're doing this at 50% off today and today only. And here's what I'm going to give you. And you throw in the kitchen sink. And the conversion that you create really should resonate emotionally more than anything else. Like, they can't live without this. So language is important. And you can't have self-doubt when you say this. It's like, look, I have hundreds of clients that I work with right now, and I love to see them thrive. I love to see their business grow simply because we put together this for them, or that, or whatever your product is. And for a limited time only, today, I would like you to book a session with me. This is a trick someone taught me. You put on the screen a URL where they can sign up to talk to you after you get off stage. And you have your calendar up there, and they book these 15-minute talks right away. Just say, go to this URL and book a session with me right now. And you're going to see your funnel start to fill up. Now, not everybody's going to convert, but you've got to become a master at conversion. But now you start to have more people who want to talk to you. Would you want me to help you go from startup to IPO like I did, raising millions of dollars, being listed in the Wall Street Journal, and valuated at $26 million? Would you want me to help you show you that road, that that pathway to success. I can do it. If I did it and I'm an artist, I can show you how to do it as well. You hear how I'm phrasing
Yeah.
everything.
Mhm.
You have to take your most successful things and don't be afraid to ask for the sale. Don't be afraid to say, look, this is a $5,000 package and I'm not giving you a discount today. Maybe you do that. But what I am going to give you is this. And you throw in the kitchen sink, you know, and show them why, if they go with you, what's going to happen. What's the success rate? What's the results? What is going to happen? And what will you guarantee? Is there a money back guarantee? Is there some sort of, other thing in there that you're going to be able to give them? It's very important when you sell from the stage to be very clear about what you're offering. That's very important because a lot of people are loosey-goosey about that. Well, for $4.95, you can get in on my mastermind. Why? Don't care. Everybody has a
Yeah.
mastermind.
Yeah.
But if you say, look, give me a year, you're going to spend $5,000 to $6,000 with me, and we're going to help you develop a book, get it published. Maybe you want to do a magazine. I can help you publish a magazine, and that'll go out to prospective clients, and it'll immediately put you at the very top of the industry. You're now an industry leader because your magazine puts you in the driver's seat where everybody else is like, you want to come to my association meeting? You're not doing that. You're pounding them with great content from other people in your industry. Things like that. I'm using this as examples so that people can hear when you do this speech, selling doesn't have to be this awkward moment where you stop and your language changes. Guess what? Today and only, we're going to offer you this. This goes back to when you and I were kids, Paul, and every announcer on the radio and television was like, but wait, there's more.
There's more.
Yeah. If you sign up today, and so you don't want it to be gimmicky. You don't want it to be hokey. You don't want it to be this sort of like, okay, now I'm going to turn on my sales hat. Your entire presentation should be driving people towards your sales. Do you know I always get an applause break when I tell people in the story where I go, are you in the middle of a revolution and you don't know it? I always get an applause break when I end that and I go, this is how we landed the JP Morgan Chase 1996 or 1998, I think it was, a CD-ROM hybrid for their annual report, and they paid us over $250,000 to do it. And I stop and people just go, whoa, like this, and they just start applauding every single time. I don't know why. I mean, it's just a statistic, but it was because of the story leading up that made them convert now to the applause, which had money attached to it. Okay. When I said we landed a $250,000 job around people who don't know that there are internet, websites that start at that price. Okay. When you work with American Express, you're going to get $250,000 to work on their website. So you better know what you're doing. So if you give your story and then the financial result of what you just learned and what the story was about, they're going to lean forward more and go, wow, this guy is brilliant. I gotta get his secret sauce. I got to hire him. So I hope that helps.
That does help. So as we wrap up with, as we, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the pearls of wisdom you've been
Thanks.
sharing.
Thanks, Paul.
Revealing the secrets. You've uncovered the secrets. Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone like me or someone who doesn't who hasn't done a keynote? What was an important piece of advice that you've either gotten or that you could give for them to get started just crafting that message and getting going?
Don't be so self-conscious about yourself. I know people who, well, in the back of their head, that negative no voice is in there telling them, why am I, standing up here doing this? I'm not that important. I'm whatever. And nobody's going to listen to me. All these dumb things that our mind does. That's the devil to me.
Yeah, it is.
That's the devil in your brain telling you're not good enough. You're not. Why would you ever do that? It starts with one speech. And yeah, you're going to bomb maybe a couple of speeches in, but you have to realize if you really are driven by this and you really want to communicate to other people and you love your fellow man, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be driven by your message. I want you to be driven by the fact that you're going to touch somebody in that audience and they're going to sit forward and they're going to dig everything you say. Doesn't matter if it's one person in every single audience. That's your goal. And that takes your mind off of you, talking all the time about me, 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 me. That's not it. The lessons are there. And I want to talk about you language. So we didn't talk about this, but most of us start our stories with, when I was a kid, my father walked into my bedroom on the day of my 18th birthday and looked me in the eye and said, "You have three choices in this household, bucko." Now change that for a moment and say, you language. You language places it in the minds of your audience. Same story, but here's the change. Imagine for a moment your father walks into your bedroom on the morning of your 18th birthday and looks you in the eye and says, "All right, buddy, according to the law, you're a man now. So you have three choices in this household. Number one, you can go to college and we'll try and help you. Number two, maybe you want to get a job and, start paying some room and board around here." And I'm like, "Whoa, what's the third choice, Dad? You can pack up your stuff and move out, buddy boy." Do you see how you're listening
Yeah.
differently just by me using you language? Take everything you write and say, I did this. And say, imagine you did this. You walk into a bar, you see this beautiful woman, and you decide you want to marry her. Already it's in your mind now. You're imagining your own personal journey just by shifting your language from I to you. That's it. That's a simple, simple thing. It's hard to master. It's hard to do, but the great keynote speakers place the story in your head. And they do that by using you language instead of I language.
Awesome. And I remember those who obviously Brad and I know each other. We've been friends for quite a long time, 14 years. It's
Yeah.
it's
Wow.
October. I think it's October, November. It was 11. Yeah, November is when we met in Grand Rapids. Uh, one of the best pieces of advice that Brad gave me was when we were on a webinar together, and he said, "Paul, that's a great story. You need to use these stories. These stories that you have are great. You should be using them as part of what you're talking about." And that's when I started using stories. And it's very effective. And I love the idea of starting out. Imagine this.
Yeah.
Imagine your father walks into your bedroom on the morning of your 18th birthday.
Yeah.
And putting the idea. Now, I've got a long ways to go because I do tell stories, but they're about me. But
Yeah, that's fine.
that's a simple switch.
I when I use I language is when I really screwed up. Like I love telling this story about how I broke my ankle in high school on the football field during band camp. During band camp is the punchline. If you don't do it in that order, it's not funny. And it's just a simple crafting. If you are the butt of the joke, you can use I language. But if it's something where you're very proud of what you did and what you stepped into, start using you language, and it'll shift people judging like, "Oh, that's an egotistical guy there," instead of going, "Wow, he did that." And tell them what you had to overcome mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually to do what you did. They want to hear those interesting little details in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pure gold, Brad.
Thank you, my
so
friend.
much.
And watch comedians like Nate Bargatze. I mean, they tell just regular stories about their life, about their kids, and you'll learn to act out your dad's voice or your friend's voice. Who's the one? Sebastian Maniscalco. I think I forgive me, Sebastian, if I mispronounced your last name. He's this Italian, comedian, and he's like, I'm sitting there and I'm doing this. He talks like he's from a New York Italian. He's hilarious, and he just tells little stories about how his wife's Jewish, and he goes, I don't know if you've ever been to a Jewish dinner. He goes, there are no Jewish cookbooks out there. He goes, we're Italian. We come in and we go, oh, this doesn't taste right. Let's get some cheese on here. Let's put this seasoning. How's that? There you go. And everybody's offended, and the crowd's laughing their butt off because it's true. Like my family's Irish on the one side. There are no Irish cookbooks, okay? Because we boil everything really well. So use your heritage, use your ethnic background. My dad being Hungarian is hilarious. Because Hungarians, they're not known for their emotional support of a child sometimes. And talk about that, because that is instrumental to the work I do with generations, because millennials don't understand why maybe their parents are a little gruff, or boomers overreacted by becoming friends with their kids because they didn't like how they were raised. That's a simple reality of it. Yeah. And once you start pointing those things out, people start to realize in the details why their sales are no longer working, or their magic sauce that worked for 40 years no longer works. It's because you have a generation that doesn't listen the same way. They don't interact the same way. They don't need your product the same way. So you're going to have to change, and you're going to be the keynote speaker who teaches all this wonderful stuff that gets them to sit forward and do things differently.
Awesome. So Brad, how can people get in touch with you and connect with you? I know we mentioned the Awaken Nation podcast.
Sure. You can email me. I'm Brad at liquidleadership.com, Brad at Liquid Leadership, and just do a Google search. Watch some of my episodes. I have a lot of business episodes on my podcast I think people would really enjoy. Several master classes in some of these people. They're astounding. I feel incredibly privileged to interview them. And, of course, just watch my stuff, watch my content, subscribe, leave a review. I'd appreciate that. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And remember, faith and action go hand in hand. So keep the pedal to the metal. And until next time on the Lead Machine Growth Show, I'm Paul Guyon, your host, and Brad Szollose. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lead Machine Growth Show with Paul Guyon, where we show you how to tackle your tech, master your message, and design your dream so that you can transform your vision into reality. Remember to visit our website at www.leadmachinegrowthshow.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Lead Machine Growth Show.